Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Ferraro. I'm a Senior Program Manager here at Inverta, and I'd like to welcome you to the second of 3 webinars focused on data-driven marketing. Our session today is on the relationship between data and content. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. In today's format, the presenters will each share their own perspectives on the relationship between data and content and what's next for data-informed content origination. And we'll have a short panel session, and if there's time, we'll take questions from the audience. You can submit a question at any time during the session. You can just click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type your question into the window. We've only planned the session for 40 minutes. You'll have plenty of time to make it to your next meeting, and we'll also be sending a copy of audio and video recordings once they are available after the session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our 2 wonderful panelists. First, we have Elle Woulfe. Elle is a revenue-focused marketer with expertise in digital marketing, demand generation, brand management, go-to-market strategy. She has led senior marketing roles at both Eloqua and PathFactory. She enjoys bringing sales and marketing teams together through shared process, goals, and KPIs. And she has made it her mission to make B2B marketing less boring. Next is Ashley Shaler. Ashley is a senior associate on our consulting team and head of marketing at Inverta. Ashley has spent more than 10 years designing and implementing world-class demand creation and lead management strategies that leverage the latest in marketing technology. She's held client-side and analyst roles in marketing systems and marketing operations and consulting roles that leverage her unique expertise in lead nurturing, account-based plays, content, messaging, and social media strategy for more than 40 clients. So with that, and again, there's me, Senior Program Manager and moderator of the webinar today. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ashley so you guys can dive into the content.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Happy Thursday. Hopefully it's been a good week for everyone. I just wanted to take a second to kind of tee up what we're doing here and why we decided to go through the process of doing a webinar series on what we feel is data-driven marketing. So rewind rather to our company offsite, and I was trying to talk about our themes for the year and what we thought was going to be important. And this idea of data-driven marketing came up, and I was a little glib about it. I was like, hasn't that what we've been doing all along? Like ever since the advent of marketing automation, like 8 to 10 years ago, we've been using data to make decisions, right? And somebody said, well, sort of, but it's grown into this new thing now, this new idea. And so we talked about it a little bit more. And basically the conclusion that we came to was that the proliferation of marketing technology, one of the sort of offshoots of that, or unintended consequences, I should say, of that was the skill specialization that emerged. And it was, you saw many different individuals, professionals sort of emerging with these highly focused and precise skill sets, usually based around a particular piece of technology or a particular discipline, right, within digital marketing. And for a while, those types of positions were really highly valued, right? And they were sought after. And then slowly over time, some of those positions became a bit commoditized, right? Because, just more people gain that experience and it becomes easier to access. Now we're seeing a new breed of marketer sort of emerge. And the reason for this graphic is that it's no longer enough to meddle in one sport, right? It's no longer enough to simply be specialized in one area. What we're seeing now is what we describe as the triathletes of modern marketing. We're seeing people who meddle in more than one area, right? Or maybe they don't meddle in any area, but they have an all-encompassing 360-degree idea of what it takes to really excel in a modern marketing organization and in a modern marketing climate. And they understand the role that data plays, the relationship that data has in bringing all of these tactics together. So we decided that really the 3 tenets where these particular triathletes excel are in planning, content, and orchestration. So those are the topics of these 3 webinars, and today we're focusing on content. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Elle Woulfe, who's going to discuss what she feels is this evolution of B2B content marketing.
Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So I wanted to start to talk a little bit about, the state of content. I remember back when I was at Eloqua, 8, 10 years ago, sort of was the advent of content marketing, when people were starting to really call it content marketing. And I think a lot has changed since then. The idea of demand creation, even to some extent, the generation of awareness and the idea of creating content, these things are inexplicably intertwined today. And if you just build this graphic here, this is a stat that I got from Gartner, and I've loved this one for a long time because I think it demonstrates that content is really how B2B buyers experience your brand. If you think about it, I'm estimating here 45% of the buying process is spent actually researching your solution. It could be even more than that if you consider what's happening when people are meeting with the buying group and what's happening, the rest of the time. But really, content is what they're doing. Content is what they're consuming when they are researching your solution. So whether that's coming to your website, going to review sites, even some of the verbal communication that they might be having, all of these things are central to how they are learning about you, your product, your solution, your customers, your viability, all of that stuff. So in today's climate, content it's your brand. It is 100% central to who you are as a company and how people think of you. And if you think about that, it actually takes an awful lot of content to create those kind of brand impressions in order to move a buyer along the journey. This is a stat that I pulled from the Demand Gen report, Content Preferences Survey, which I actually really like a lot. There's a lot of really great data in there. And this is the average number of pieces of content consumed before engaging with the salesperson. And I want to emphasize this, amid making a purchase decision. Now that means that people are consuming this content when they are really on the path to purchase. They've kind of decided they have a problem, they're investigating solutions, now they're doing their homework, right? This actually doesn't take into account the content that they may have consumed before they got to this point. Your buyer may become aware of you through a million different channels, a million different places, and a million different types of content. But we know that when they start to get serious about making a purchase decision, this is when they start to really move down the funnel and consume that content that is central to helping them make a decision. So it takes a lot of content, a lot of touches in order for your buyer to feel ready to advance in that buying process. And the reality is content's a lot of different things. In that scenario, we're talking about, buyers making decisions, advancing in the buyer's journey, doing their research about your product, your solution, your customers. These are the types of content they like. These are the types of content they consume. I don't think this would be a surprise to anybody. They're obviously consuming a lot of case studies. They want to know what people like them are doing with your product, the success that they've had. They're attending webinars, potentially like one like this one. They're looking at analyst reports to get those unbiased reviews. So there's lots of different places that your buyer is going to consume content to learn about you. But again, this is really once they get into that buying process. And if you think about the fact that, your buyer is consuming all this stuff, then you really start to go, well, geez, in B2B, yeah, our brand is all about our content. It's all about all the different ways that our buyer is learning about us, the ways that we are being surfaced to that buyer through different channels at different times, right? So content is lots of different things. And, you talk to different buyers and they will value different aspects of your content strategy. I know as a practitioner of marketing for a long time, you'll see this even within a buying committee at a single organization. No two people are doing the same thing. They all have different preferences, different requirements, and different needs when it comes to content. So they're coming at the research phase of purchasing a product from very different places. But here's the deal. So as I said, I focused a lot in this past couple of minutes on sort of the content people are consuming as they're buying. It's so much more than that, right? It's so much more than that. Sure, it is that corporate website, but it's the kind of social media posts that you're making, even when you're sharing third-party content. It's when third parties are talking about you, or you're participating in a podcast, or speaking on someone else's webinar. It's all the email communications that you send out. Both through your marketing campaigns, but also through your sales channels. It is that longer form content. It's the case studies and the ebooks and all of the things that you're creating. It's the blog posts, and ultimately even it's things that you share on channels like Twitter, where again, you might not even be sharing your own content, you're promoting somebody else's content. But all of these different things, all of these ways that you are reaching the buyer are making an impression about who you are as a brand. What kind of point of view do you demonstrate? And what are you trying to tell people about the kind of organization that you are? Now, some of this is tone and voice and all of these things, but all of these various touch points, it's all content. I think sometimes people tend to think that content is, something really long form or, some specific type of medium or channel, but really it's anything that your buyer is potentially engaging with, whether it's on the path to purchase or maybe it's just something that they're bumping into sort of out in the wild. And if you think about the evolutionary nature of content marketing, I think like back in the early days of content marketing, when it really started to be called content marketing, this is what we thought about, this is what content marketing was. It was the stuff behind the form, but it's not just that. Again, but this is content, sure, your high value content that you stick behind a form, that is content and that is important. And that tends to be the stuff of lead generation. I'm not even gonna say demand generation because I think demand generation is much, much bigger than that. This is how you're trying to get conversion and get people into your database so that you can continue marketing them, and that's important. But the thing that I want everybody to hear loud and clear is that every single thing that you put your name on as an organization is content, and it is the sum of all that parts that creates a brand. So, I used Inverta as an example here because it's an Inverta webinar, and Inverta does lots of different things to make an impression about the kind of organization they are, the kind of experience you're going to have if you work with them. The brand is the sum of all of these parts. It is this webinar, sure. It is this point of view that comes through, when you hear us talking, but it's the experience you have when you go to their website. It's the experience that you have when you read their blog. So brand is the sum of many, many parts, and in B2B, those parts tend to be made up of content. So I just wanted to walk through a couple of myths that I think exist as it pertains to content, and sort of try to smash them if I can. I think that especially in demand gen and often in content marketing as well, we are often trying to orchestrate this one perfect buyer journey. We think like, you know what, we're going to create, like, first you're going to go here, you're going to read these things, you're going to move here, and you're going to read these things. I don't think the perfect buyer journey exists. Okay. So, if you think about what I said before, in a buying committee, people are coming from different places with different roles. They're entering the buying process at different times. They have very, very different needs. There is no one perfect buyer journey. Every buyer is on a unique journey. That's and that's not to say we shouldn't work really hard to fill gaps in the knowledge that our buyer needs to build as they move through this journey, but don't assume that everybody's going to go through it in the same way. Number two, your most viewed content is your best content. Your most viewed content often is the stuff that you've promoted the most. And so we game, and again, in thinking about having a data-driven strategy, people start to look at, well, these assets performed really well. We should make more stuff like this. And then you go, well, actually, we spent a lot of money to promote those. They're in all of our nurture campaigns. We bought media around them. And so, you have to start to control for the fact that where you are putting a lot of emphasis and promotion behind an asset is probably going to get a lot more views. There are actually more reliable metrics to look at when you're thinking about your best content. Number three, personal emails aren't content. I actually think this is categorically untrue. If you work in B2B, chances are you have a sales team. Chances are you have an inside sales team or a BDR team. Chances are you have a customer experience team. All those people are communicating with your prospects and your customers all the time, or your future customers. So when a salesperson is sending an email to a prospect, that is content that is sent on behalf of your company. That is a brand impression, and a chance to, again, be consistent and precise in the kind of point of view you want to promote so that people know what your brand is all about. Number four, more content is better than less content. This is just like a tale as old as time. I've had this conversation with a million people. I actually think a manageable amount of content is the best amount of content. And I use this example a lot, but the reason why we love Netflix, when you go onto Netflix, they know everything about how you've consumed content on their platform. And what they deliver to you is a manageable set of content. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of things you could watch on Netflix. But what they're showing you in the moment that you arrive is a manageable amount of content that is precisely for you, highly, highly personalized. And that's why it's so easy to go there and consume content, because you're not scrolling the channel guide for 20 minutes looking for the one thing you might want to watch at that moment. So delivering a manageable set of the best content is better than just, you know, having mountains of content that you push out there and hope your buyer will find. And last but not least, that all your high value content should live behind a form. And this is a bit of a philosophical debate, and I have lots of conversations about this one. You know, it really comes down to, like, what are you trying to do? If at the end of the day, your goal is to create a really highly educated and qualified buyer who knows a lot about you, who's excited to do business with you, who has a real, you know, a sharp understanding of your point of view and your brand and what it's all about, if that's the most important thing, you have to be brave at times, and you have to break down those walls and not decide that you're going to put a form in front of everyone. Sure, there are times when you're spending a lot of money to get that conversion, or it's, you know, it's the right time and place to put that form there. But, you know, I tend to err on the side of setting the content free, because what you're trying to do is create an experience with your brand that is compelling, that makes somebody want to talk to you. And if you do it right, if you educate them, if you deliver things of value, if you get them excited, they will convert. And they may not do it on that asset at that moment, but they show up on your website, they request a demo. You know, it's a long path typically in B2B. And so, you know, delivering your best content, making it easy for the buyer, giving an experience, showing what your brand is all about is often a better strategy than just, you know, always putting that wall in front of the buyer. So that's it. Those are my 5 content myths debunked.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elle. I love it. I love that you have passionate discussions about gating. That's
with everyone, with anyone who will listen, actually.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So it's going to be over to me now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of data in crafting a better content strategy. But I think in order to get into that, I have to tell you a little bit of a story that I always think about, you know, when I think about content origination and creation. And it's my mother and my father taking a 4-year-old Ashley, an 8-year-old Allison, my older sister, and a 10-year-old Amy, my other older sister, to Disney World. And whenever I ask my mom about how that trip to Disney World was when we were little kids, she will tell you without missing a beat, I want a Mickey Pop, I want an ice cream cone, I want a Mickey doll. And she'll just like rattle off all of these things over and over and over again. And I always think of that when we talk about content strategy, because the reality here is that assets are easy, but ideas are hard. And oftentimes you'll be sitting in a planning scenario, a marketing planning scenario, and you'll hear, I want an infographic, I want an ebook, I want, you know, a blog post, I want 3 blog posts. And I always go back to my mom, because when you start thinking with asset first, right? If you start thinking about marketing first and not content first, what you're going to do is you're going to get a lot of stuff of varying quality, much like all of the things that can be purchased at Disney World. Like, no offense, right, to Disney, but you're going to get a lot of stuff that's of varying quality that isn't necessarily originated with the buyer in mind. So I like to always say assets are easy, but ideas are hard. And how do you go about sort of flipping the switch here and leading with the idea? Because the merchandisation of the idea should be the easy part, right? But really figuring out what that compelling idea is that's going to connect with your audience is where the tough work is. And why is this important? Well, oftentimes there exists this big gap between the content that you produce and the content that your audience wants. And it's a little cliche now, I think, even to describe it like this, but it's still happening. Right? We stay in our comfortable little zone and we write what we know, which is usually our products, our solutions, our services, whatever that might be. But on the other side of this chasm, there's a whole bunch of material that your audience actually wants to hear about. And the reality is here, there needs to be a bridge that you build between the content that you produce and the content that your audience wants. And data can help you build that bridge. When I say data, I mean things like audience research, lexicon, understanding things like consumption and preference info, understanding what your audience prefers, right? How you can customize your content for better accessibility, right? For better consumption. Understanding what their challenges are, their pain points, how they phrase their problems and issues. All of this falls under the heading of data and information that you can use to build that bridge between the content you're going to produce anyway and the content that your audience actually wants to hear about, actually wants to read. So why do organizations have trouble building that bridge, or what happens if you fail to build that bridge? You end up with a whole bunch of content that has no purpose. It's not useful to your buyer. It might be irrelevant to your buyer. It's taken out of context from where your buyer is. It's not unique. You can go on Google, type the title of your article, and 15 of the same articles authored by your competitors will come up. And then finally, it might be positioned badly or in poor taste. Audience research is really important to do because you can understand things like, what is my audience's appetite for humor? What is their appetite for empathy? What is their appetite for these really important and fundamental aspects of humanity that make things so interesting, that make us want, right, to participate in things, share them, and consume them? So data is essentially what takes your audience from a stage of neutral or passive awareness of you and your solution to affinity, right? So let's talk a little bit more about data's role specifically in origination. So if we, on our right here, have our assets, and on our left here, we have that tough part, right? We have the ideas. Data can both inform the topics and the execution and distribution, right? When we talk about data informing topics, or what I describe as origination, we talk about buyer research, which can inform, like I said, their lexicon, their appetite for humor, empathy, and emotion. How do they phrase the challenges that they have? When they get angry about something, what are the words that they use? How do they describe that anger? Anger is a very powerful emotion. I always tell my clients, never be like afraid to rant on behalf of your audience about something that makes them very angry or pisses them off. It will give you industry, domain, and segment information, right? So there could be something really critical happening in a particular space. Mergers, acquisitions, regulatory or compliance changes, things that is very important for you to be aware of in your content creation, or it could, you know, it could very, very much miss the mark. Understanding what your content greatest hits have been in the past and why. Elle just said, you know, sometimes you'll think that your most popular content is simply the content that you've invested the most time and resources in promoting. So, right, taking a very sort of practical look at what has actually been our best pieces, why were they the best, and can we recreate that type of behavior under a different theme or topic or for a similar audience. And then finally, successful narratives, right? When you look at your buying center, when you look at how they explore for a solution, how they go about solving a problem that's really giving them an issue in their work, what does that look like? What does that exposition look like? What does that rising action look like? What is the trigger event, right? Yesterday you weren't looking for a solution. Today you are. What changed, right? Remember what those successful narratives are through your buyer research, through your buyer interviews, and use that from the origination, for origination. And then execution and distribution can tell you things like, what's the most appropriate length for an asset? What's the most appropriate or the most consumed, most popular format? What layouts work, right? Do we have people that are mostly viewing on mobile? Do we have people mostly viewing on desktop? Is it a blend? Do we like a combination of text and graphics? Do we like it to be primarily graphics? Preferred distribution channel and frequency, I think are really important too. And these are things where consistent measurement can give you an insight into where to go there. And then finally, right, what's the purpose of the asset? When you think about your whole demand creation strategy, or even broader in terms of your marketing plan or your campaign planning strategy, that asset has a purpose, right? Is it to create demand? Is it to change sentiment? What is the purpose of that asset, and how well is it performing according to the purpose that you set for it? And I think that this takes me really nicely into my next slide, which I called content measurement and monitoring. And notice how I didn't call these metrics or KPIs, because the reality is sentiment, tone, and style are very difficult to measure. You don't usually see metrics or KPIs directly associated with those, but they're still really important to keep your finger on the pulse of as a content specialist, right? You need to understand, is my brand viewed positively, negatively, or neutral right now? Why is that? You need to understand, again, what is the tone and style of my brand in the marketplace? What are our audiences expecting from us? Are they expecting us to be funny? Are they expecting us to put out quizzes and you know, different humorous material? Are they expecting us to challenge the status quo? What is that expectation, and is our content aligning with that? And then there are things that are a little bit easier to measure. Like, what are the asset types that perform the best for us, right? And the consumption behavior of our audience. And you can understand that by measuring the frequency and the depth of access of these pieces. What are our priority channels in those publishing outlets? So what are the delivery mechanisms of the content that is working the best for us? And what are the sources of that content? Where are people going to access it? So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about how we see data's direct connection to that whole content operations process. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put on our futurist hats a little bit and talk about what we feel is next for the relationship between data and content. And to do that, I'm going to transition it back over to Elle.
Thank you very much. So I just want to talk for a minute about sort of how all these things we've talked about sort of come into focus when it comes to sharpening your brand message. You know, it's funny, I actually gave a talk about this recently at the B2B SMX event, where as a demand marketer by trade, I'm not the kind of person who had historically thought a ton about the brand. I thought a lot about the assets we were creating, and I think I did work really hard on the ideation part of it and making sure we were creating stuff that was gonna, you know, hit the mark and be good for the buyer and all those things. But as a demand marketer, I was constantly thinking about how are we going to reach the level of demand we need to create in order to fill the pipe and do all those things. In my last role as a head of marketing, where I really was the owner of the brand, the custodian of the brand, I started to think a lot about it. And I worked at a company where I had the opportunity to rebrand the company. And it started to bring the importance of brand point of view into focus for me as it relates to content strategy. Brand, you know, when we talk about demand gen or we talk about, you know, various parts of marketing, they seem really clear. Brand is this one that I think gets squishy, and people are like, well, what is it really? So when I'm talking about your brand message, I think it comes down to a couple of things. So the first is, what does your brand stand for? You know, and can you even answer that question? You know, it's funny, I've worked for so many companies where I could tell you what they did, but I couldn't necessarily tell you what they stood for. And I think sometimes in B2B, this gets completely glossed over. In many B2C companies, they will spend, you know, there's whole people who think about this all day long. What does our brand stand for? How do we convey that through all these various channels and, you know, programs and campaigns and all of that? In B2B, we're constantly in this sort of manufacturing era of just, we're gonna create more stuff, more content to get more stuff out there, to get more people to convert, to fill the funnel. And when you do that, you tend to forget to really bring brand into focus. And content is the place where, again, this brand sort of point of view can really start to come to life and be surfaced to your buyer. So that's one question. When we're talking about brand, can you answer that question? The second question is, it's kind of the same question put a different way, but what do you want to be known for? You know, and I've given lots of examples in the past of this. I think HubSpot's a good one if we just stick in MarTech. Like, when you think of HubSpot, you think inbound marketing. And that was not an accident. That was a very, very deliberate point of view that HubSpot cultivated over a very long period of time. And in fact, you know, they were writing books about inbound marketing well before they were this big behemoth that they are today, right? They really wanted this point of view around inbound marketing is the new way to do things, and they wanted that to be central to how you think of them. And as a result, today, we still think all these things, and they are still the inbound marketing company. I think Drift is doing this pretty well today and creating a category around conversational marketing, where you think Drift, you think conversational marketing. So again, and it is the companies that do this well, they have they know what their brand stands for, they have a point of view, and they are unbelievably relentless and consistent in pushing that message into everything they do. It's the hashtag on their tweet, it's the punchline to the ebook, it's splattered all over the website. And I don't mean gratuitously or obnoxiously, but in a way that it is so consistent that you can't help but always have this thread going through everything where you think of the brand in that way. And the last thing, does your content reinforce that? So if you know what your brand stands for and you know what you want to be known for, are you doing a good job of making sure you surface that message in everything that you do? Again, I think as a demand marketer, I didn't quite get that for a long time. And then I started to realize, wow, content is the way that our buyer experiences our brand. It is it is how people think of us. That's how they start to form an opinion about us. Every single piece of content we create, whether that is the smallest of the small things or the biggest of the big, are all opportunities to reinforce that brand message and that brand point of view. And if you bring it into focus for the buyer and you're super consistent in taking that message to market through all the things that you do, you will start to be known for that thing. So I think there's two big ways to muddle your brand, and you see this a lot in B2B. It's really unfortunate. So the first way I think that brands muddle, or they muddle their brand, is to try to stand for too many things. I think this is, I work for a lot of early stage companies, and there's always an evolution of the message. And so, marketers tend to be the first people to get sick of the thing that they're doing. We get sick of our own website. We get sick of our best performing campaign. We get sick of it because we've just been looking at it for too long. And messages can be like that too. I think sometimes, again, pulling back from that HubSpot example, HubSpot never cooled off on that message. It was their first message and they stuck with it, and they didn't go out and say, well, we're about inbound marketing and this and this and this and this and this, right? They were about inbound marketing. So I think when you try to be too many things to too many people, or, you hop from one message to the next and get sick of that last thing that you were talking about, you end up standing for nothing, or being known for nothing. Again, I worked for a company fairly recently that I think it took us 3 years to finally figure out what we were about. And it's really hard to change sentiment. Once you started to say, we're about this, oh no, wait a second, now we're about this. And now we're about this. That's confusing for the buyer, right? I think that you have to really start to develop this point of view around your brand pretty early on and hold on for dear life. Because if you can do that and be consistent and bring it through everything, you will start to be known for that, whatever that unique thing is that you're promoting. The second way I think I think you can model your brand is just not being consistent or repetitive enough. Again, I think it's sort of an occupational hazard with especially demand marketing and content marketing too, where you always want the new thing, you want the fresh thing, you want it to be great and new and exciting, and that's all well and good. But having that consistency and that repetition, this is pulled directly from the B2C playbook. Reach, frequency, putting that message in front of people and hammering it home. It is how, especially if you are in a noisy, crowded market like marketing technology is, it is how you stand out. It is how you differentiate. It is how you end up with a brand that people recognize and know what you are about, and don't go, oh, they're those guys who do that thing kind of like those other guys. Like that's not the situation you want to be in. You want to be really sharp, really consistent, and really just try to stand for one thing. And when you can do that and pull it through all of your content assets, all of the things that you build, you will start to have a brand that shines. So this is the other thing I'll just say, and I am incredibly passionate about this. At the end of the day, your goal as a marketer, whether you're a demand marketer, content marketer, whatever it is, your goal is to help your buyer buy. At the end of the day, we're not trying to push, your buyer doesn't care where they are in your funnel. They don't care if you got them to fill out the form. That's not what it's about. We have to at some point start thinking a little bit less about constantly trying to get that conversion and put that form in front of people, and think more about, am I creating a truly educated, passionate, informed buyer who's going to ultimately become a better customer because they know so much about us and they have as Ashley said, affinity for the brand. I understand gating, it's important, it plays a role, there's a time and a place for it. I believe all of those things to be true. However, I think there is a gratuitous use of forms and gates in B2B marketing today. And I think it gets in the way of buyer education and brand affinity. I think that at the end of the day, if you want to be a successful brand, you've got to be willing to be a little bit braver about, how we will ultimately get our buyer to convert. And I think that the way that you do that is by giving them incredible experiences, really great content that meets their needs, and making it easy for them to access. If you do that, you will end up with very smart, loyal, educated buyers who come and convert in other ways. And that's, sorry, jumping off my soapbox now. That is my little rant about enabling buyers in the best way possible.
No, I think it's awesome. We can hear your soapbox all day. It's great.
I got many soapboxes.
Stay tuned. No, just kidding. So I just wanted to kind of take us home here, at least from the presentation perspective, and talk a little bit about, where we think sort of data is going to play a role in the content origination and execution process going forward, or where I think it is. And the first is, I feel like AI and natural language processing is going to assume a bigger role in origination. If you think about language is data, right? Language is data. It does have structure to it. It's not completely unstructured data. But think of what you could do if you could amass all of the language and conversation that was happening around your company and your brand, from the customer service emails going back and forth, to the web inquiries, to the conversations that the BDR's team was having, right, with the inbound inquiries and their outbound prospecting calls. Think of what could happen from a content origination standpoint if you could pull all of that language together and you could utilize machine learning to be able to extrapolate the most popular and compelling themes on the minds of your buyers. Really taking the information that buyers are giving you through those day-to-day interactions and using that to inform your content strategy. I think that would really be, that would be really the realization. I think a lot of the insight-led marketing that we talk about a lot. Many of the big barriers to insight-led marketing is simply the time and resources that it takes, right, to do the research required to come up with those compelling themes. So if we could utilize machine learning and natural language processing to get better about that, I think it would be really powerful. And I think there's a degree of semantic analysis in there too, right, that needs to happen. As always, when you're trying to interpret large amounts of language data, right, because things can take on a lot of different tones and styles. But I would also challenge you to think about now, what are the barriers to getting there in an enterprise setting? Think about the challenges that we have with data in general today, right, customer data. Living in different places, difficult to access, doesn't integrate with each other. I don't think that in general, marketing is ever going to realize the true power of AI and machine learning until we can solve the data problem, until you can solve the data problem within your organization. And second, we really need to shift the conversation here. We need to shift it from what do we want to tell our buyers, what do we want to promote, push, or amplify. And hey, in marketing roles in the past, I have been in your shoes, or I have been in those shoes, because usually the mandate is, this is the new feature, this is the new product, this is the new release. Let's see how we can make that attractive to our buyers. We make the assumption that our buyers care about the reason that we developed that new feature, the reason why we're offering this new thing or we've done a new release. And we try to reverse engineer the content and the messaging to fit that reason. When the reality is, our buyers are telling us every day what they want to hear about, what they care about, what is on their minds. And if we can shift the conversation from reverse engineering our content to really meet the needs of the business to meeting the needs of the audience in a better way, I think that the leads, the demand, everything else is just going to come naturally, because you're going to be creating that affinity and you're going to be creating material that's interesting, that audiences care about, that they wait for, and you're not going to need to worry about putting forms in front of things, because it's not even going to matter.
Amen. It's funny. I just need to say that Ashley and I created our slides, separately and then brought them together. And I was like, oh, kindred spirits. We share the same brain.
Awesome.
So we are right at 40 minutes after the hour, but I think we can squeeze in one question that came through that I really think can be applicable. It talks about having a small team, but I think it could be applicable to any size team. So the question is, I have a small team, but really want to become more data-driven and proactive with content origination as opposed to reactive. What are your recommendations for someone who doesn't have as many resources, but still wants to adopt a data-driven approach?
So, I mean, I think this can be really simple. I mean, I don't think you have to have some crazy process for doing this. Like, you can go see what your intended audience is liking and sharing. Like, you know who some accounts are that you want to sell to, you know who some buyers are in those accounts. Go see what those people are out there sharing on social media. You can look at search volumes for different topics. What are people actually looking for out there, and start to build a content strategy around that. And everybody has some amount of data around, hey, when we email our database, we get really good results with this versus this. Like, I mean, that is data that you can use to inform content strategy. It doesn't need to be some, massive amounts of data that you're sitting on to make these decisions. It's just looking at what have our buyers liked before? What do people like them like? Let's develop a strategy around that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that Google Analytics is a really easy tool to drop on your website, and then just utilizing, some UTM parameters, and hopefully that's not too technical for this audience, but just gives you a good, quick visual in terms of what's driving traffic to your website. And I think if you're a small team, and your mandate is demand creation or sort of reputation and awareness building, website traffic should be one of those things that you're looking at. So if you're able to even just gauge, hey, when we publish more blog articles, our content goes up, that's a great thing to know, right? Keep doing that. Or, we noticed that, right, some of the advertising that we're doing on Facebook is driving traffic here. Just getting a sense of where the traffic is coming from and when it rises and falls is, I think, one of the best things that you can do if you're a smaller team.
And I think sometimes people hear data-driven strategy and just deer in the headlights, we got to have a revenue ops person or a statistician or whatever. And it's it can be scrappy. It can be a DIY thing where you just go do just 10 minutes of research, and suddenly you go, oh, people seem to be looking for this information. Let's develop some content around that.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Awesome.
Well, we are at time.
Yeah, so thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Elle. I think that was really informative content. And I really think that most marketers can absolutely, like you said, both of you guys said, it can be down and dirty. It doesn't need to be overly complex.
Totally. And yeah, Erica, I just wanted to take a minute to drum up some publicity for our next session. Data and orchestration. This one I think is going to be really popular because it's sort of, the right person, right place, right time, right tactic, but on steroids, right? How do we take the data that we have access to and become very, very precise about that? And I think in this world of sort of omni-channel marketing being the dream, right? Swarming the accounts when they show activity. This is going to become, just a super, super hot topic, if not already. So September 12th, hopefully everyone will be back to school by then. You'll be able to carve out some time, enjoy a webinar. And that's, of course, going to be with David York, who's the founder and CEO of SureShot, Shelly Grassi and Steve Skotkin from Thomson Reuters, and Ann Roski from our consulting team. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining today. Really appreciate it. And you can visit inverta.com for a recording of the first session if you missed it. And I will also be sending out a recording of this session as well to everyone. And you can also find it on inverta.com as well. So
send us your questions. Send us your questions if we didn't get to them. We're happy to answer via email. You have
totally. Yeah.
Happy to. Yeah.
Send us questions, send us emails, tweet us. You know what? Connect, just connect. We love it.